Whatever you want. Okay. All right. Free Smoked Podcast tuned in. Here, sitting down with my friend, Payham. And this is a different style podcast. Usually, I have friends on here or rappers or, interview them and just talk about their career, music stuff like that. But I'm on my Joe Rogan shit today. Little backstory on how we met. We were at one of my good friends' house, and it was like a Saturday evening. We were all kind of just hanging out, and you were there, and we started talking about some of the like smartest stuff I've had conversations about type of thing. Like deeper questions. It was one of those like, oh my God, who the fuck is this guy, and how does he know everything? So we're here to talk about the world. I mean, health. We were talking a lot about what were we talking about that night? We were talking about hair loss that night. We talked
about quite a lot of things.
Yeah, so, definitely need to go over hair loss. But for those watching this, just give a little background on what you do or who you are and stuff like that.
Yeah. No, it was a very interesting night we met, and I think we went into like a ton of tangents into like probably 8 different conversations. I don't know where it started or ended.
So many.
But it was enjoyable. So my background, let's see, I worked in a few different areas in healthcare. My main areas in clinical nutrition, and I also do some work in behavioral therapy and behavioral settings with individuals in that setting. I've studied, the general stuff that most people study: biology, physiology, a lot of nutritional chemistry. Worked with patients in the nutritional setting from individuals who have diabetes and hypertension or nutritional deficiencies, things that also relate to hair loss. Worked with individuals in behavioral settings from certain younger ages to older ages, and I've been doing it for what feels like a long time now, although definitely not as long as some people.
Yeah, so like recently I know everyone in the beginning of the year, they kind of like have their New Year's resolutions and try to change their life, blah blah blah. But I'm actually trying. It's like I'm in week 4, but nutrition is like a big thing I'm kind of focusing on, because basically it's just like I got a lot of friends that are older and they are getting diagnosed with diabetes, and they're all just like have to stop drinking because high blood pressure and it just catches up to them. So I mean, nutrition is super important. I want to talk about how scary are microplastics. Because that was one of the
I did not expect that.
That was one of the conversations we had that night. Okay. And I was like, yo, we're fucked. Yeah. The microplastics. Well, I mean, yeah, right. Like, so it's like in the grand scheme of things, in like this nutrition, us consuming food, blah blah blah. Like, what do you think is like our biggest concern?
Oh man, I don't know if I can pinpoint it to a specific thing, although I totally think that's a very valid question. Microplastics are of concern, but during a pandemic, I think one of the biggest concern is, are people having enough of are they physiologically healthy enough in their background, vitamin D levels, all these things, to make it so that if they get COVID, at this point with Omicron, it's almost honestly when you get COVID, right, that they are sick for 3 days in bed rather than 3 weeks in a hospital bed or an ICU. I think supplementation, these kinds of things are things that people don't give too much attention to. I think our diets are generally very important. Definitely environmental impact on us. When you are drinking out of any given plastic cup from like a coffee shop, or we have Ziploc bags and all the environmental toxins that go into the water supply, we are getting a lot of microplastic consumption. And unfortunately, because of the chemical composition of these compounds, they're synthetic, obviously, in nature, your body doesn't really have much mechanism to deal with them. It doesn't break them down. Sometimes they pass through you very harmlessly, but there has been studies that shows that the average American, and each person may be different. Some people, like I see, you're drinking out of like glass rather than plastic. Sometimes that helps, but the average American consumes about anywhere between 6 ounces to maybe upwards of like 12 to 15 ounces of plastic a year. That's roughly a pound of plastic. Doesn't mean that's like accumulating in you, but it's certainly everything that goes through you.
It's not good for us.
It's not good for you. No,
do we know the long term? We don't know any effects of that, right? Because plastic is relatively new.
It's relatively new. We've done a lot of research into it, right? COVID's also relatively new. It all comes down to how much resources and funding and just energy have they put into researching. And I think in plastic, especially with being California and our environmental awareness that we have and the culture in the state, there has been a decent amount of research into it. I can tell you that even as far as how we're seeing all these, brands like Clean Canteen and Hydro Flask having metal bottles now, they're BPA free. That movement came out of research into plastics. BPA, BPB, there's a lot of BPs, and they're basically in the plastic. What we found out is that when we drink from plastic bottles, this isn't necessarily a microplastic, but it's a compound that comes out of the plastic. It leaches into our water. It's an endocrine. It's a hormone disruptor. So for men, you can imagine it affects your testosterone levels, which you probably don't want. It can accelerate hair loss. It can cause a whole host of issues for men and women. Yeah.
Pretty sketchy shit. So like what do you think in terms of like nutrition and food? Like what's gonna like be our downfall? Like what do we really have to focus on? Because like it seems like there's so much. There's microplastics. There's disease. There's like just the meat industry. How like parasites, all that shit. Like what you said you study nutrition, right? Or you?
I studied nutrition.
You studied nutrition,
and then I worked in it. Yeah.
So like what can we do to like avoid these things, or what? Yeah. Like.
So, I mean, everybody, when we look at overall epidemiologic risk for a population, you always hear doctors and scientists will say things like, well, you have this probability of getting cancer or this of getting this disease. And that's a population-wide risk, but you can modify your own individual risk. Obviously, not to sound like broken record, but, diet and exercise, get enough sleep, keep your stress levels manageable. And I'm going to say manageable because nobody's going to be able to keep stress low nowadays mostly. As far as your nutrition is concerned, for most people, and you have to communicate with your physician, your healthcare providers about this, but for most people, a supplement is good because we just don't get enough of the micronutrients we need. And it doesn't hit you all at once, but 10, 15 years down the line, a chronic vitamin D deficiency, a chronic vitamin A, even not getting enough B vitamins you need will accelerate aging. And I'm not just talking about wrinkles, but, nerve issues, degeneration of your vision, things like that. So that's a huge thing. I think supplementation is important. Finding the right supplement. There are Out of 100% of supplements on the market, maybe 10, 15 of them are actually evidence-based, and a lot of them are just a lot of hype, unfortunately.
Right. A lot of bullshit.
There's a lot of bullshit, yeah. To be frank. So that's one thing. Another thing is that, the biggest threat, I think, right now to nutrition is the biggest threat to, on a global scale right now, I think, is sustainability. You brought up the meat industry. Yeah. I don't want to get too into that because I'll probably go missing from my bed in the middle of the night. No, I'm kidding. But the thing is that, meat is not that sustainable. I'm not vegan by any means, but I do think that if you really want to protect your health, eating less processed meat is a huge thing. The World Health Organization has now classified processed meat as, I think it's a group 2A carcinogen. To put it into perspective, that's the same level carcinogen as cigarette smoke they put it on.
And what kind of meats are that?
Anything that's heavily processed. So, for example, bacon, sausage, things that are, they don't really, look like that's normal composition they should have. Regular steak, probably less processed, right? Probably not the best thing either, better than processed meat. But generally speaking, red meat has certain effects on our body, on our liver, on our body chemistry, where it creates, we hear about this in the media all the time, free radicals, right? Every time you take an antioxidant, it's to neutralize a free radical, to keep you from aging, from getting cancer. And red meat seems to accelerate free radical production in our bodies and our blood quite a lot. Damn. So avoiding red meat, and I'm not saying, we can't have an In-N-Out burger once in a while, right? But I would say if you can do it once every few weeks rather than a few times every week, that would be really ideal.
What makes something processed? Like, what is that?
So everything is processed to some extent, or most things, right? We're unfortunately not like on a farm.
You can't get raw shit.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard. You can get, raw nuts. You can just go get chicken breast from Trader Joe's or wherever. But the thing is that, to some extent, everything we're having is processed nowadays. I don't think processing itself is the problem, because if you think about yogurt, for example, Greek yogurt, high in protein, low in fat, low in saturated, it's not that bad for you. It's got probiotics. It's processed, right? But it's the type of processing that's the issue. So what I generally say is rule of thumb, if you look at the label, the nutrition label, and the ingredients feel like you're reading an essay, is it always a bad thing? No, but simpler ingredients tend to make it simpler for your body to process. Lower sodium, right? If something is really processed, it's going to have a really good shelf life. The grocery store can keep it there for 2 years and sell it to you whenever they want. But if it's got 3,000 milligrams of sodium in you, we're talking about high blood pressure and diabetes. That's certainly something that's another huge epidemic in our Western societies. We eat a lot more sodium than we should. On average, probably 30% more.
Well, it's like our portion size compared to the rest of the world it's huge, way bigger, right?
It's huge. Yeah, and I know you've probably been out of the country. I've been to, even if we just go to our northern neighbors in Canada, everything's smaller.
Do you feel like that plays an effect on how? So actually, you said it. These people who are going through these or having these issues with like diabetes, bad nutrition, then they get sicker quicker. Because that's one thing that happened to me. I have got COVID like 3-4 times.
Really?
And I was like, not really living the healthiest, not really drinking. I mean, not really eating the best.
Right.
Just shitty lifestyle. But I was like, that was one main factor of like, all right, you need to like get a little healthier because you keep getting sick. They go hand in hand.
They do. They absolutely do. And there's, just to speak about this like mechanistically, it's like even something as seemingly simple as vitamin D. They found that if you are vitamin D deficient, now taking more vitamin D if you have normal level of vitamin D won't necessarily help you. But if you're vitamin D deficient, you're about 2 to 3 times more likely to get COVID. And then if you get COVID, you are significantly higher to be hospitalized. In fact, most people who are hospitalized are either unvaccinated or severely deficient to the point where, if they had been getting regular checkups, it would have been caught earlier.
Yeah, that's interesting you say that, because I just went for my like yearly physical, and they said I was low on vitamin D.
Yeah, a lot of us
and
are.
I have to take these like vitamin D capsules.
Probably massive dose, like 30,000 IU
No,
once a week or
he
something.
said like they were low. I have it. It was like at least 1,000 to 4,000 or something like that. Something mellow, but
yeah, that's not that bad.
But vitamin D plays an important part. I mean, it just sucks that I just hate getting sick.
Yeah.
And it's just like, if you could just change up your diet. Where do you start in like having a good diet?
Yeah. You start by taking a little more time to prepare your food, I think, by putting colors on the plate. The colors that we see on the plate, the raspberries, blueberries, broccoli, these colors, the colors themselves, when our eyes see them, there's something called anthocyanins. That's why they have that spectrum of light. And in nature, they are literally designed to make us crave them. They are designed to make us want to eat them. This is why if you look at a bland plate of brown, typical American food versus something from the Mediterranean, it's colorful, it just catches your eye much more. Colorful foods are really good.
And I think it's also like, for me, the reason why I wasn't eating as healthy is I didn't have the patience. You just want that shit now.
Yeah.
It's so easy to just be sent food, Uber Eats.
Food prep is stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So, all right, so identify, like for example, like what advice would you give me on how to improve my diet on just like a simple level, like saving time, money, all that? Like, what are some basic stuff that kind of can improve or make the difference?
Sure, yeah. I mean, so for one thing, if you don't already, find a supplement that's good, do your research, make sure that it's third-party verified, and take a vitamin. Because even if we have optimal diets, we don't usually get enough. Another thing, start putting certain things into your diet, like broccoli, like cauliflower, asparagus, things like that, green things. In the morning, an easy thing when you wake up is just have a little bit of oatmeal with some berries on top of it, or a protein shake, something like that. It doesn't take that long to throw a handful of berries, a scoop of whey protein, and some oats into a blender. Eating eggs, eating potatoes, things that are just more are going to take a little bit more time to make. What I do sometimes at the beginning of the week, although I don't do as much, is you spend an hour cooking all the rice, cooking all the pasta, cooking all whatever.
Meal prep?
Yeah, meal prep, yeah, right. And then put that away, and then maybe you just make the chicken that night or whatever. It saves time. I think one reason why a lot of people stay away from eating healthy is not because they don't already know 90% of what I'm saying right now. It's because maybe they don't know how important it is. And I think 10 years later, if you look back and say, well, if I just eaten, at home 3 times more a week and out 3 times less a week, I would have saved X amount of money for one thing, but I also would have saved X amount of money that I'm not putting towards medical bills. And unfortunately, it sounds very preachy when I say it that way, but there's a direct correlation, if not a causative relationship, between eating out more and getting sicker quicker. Our grandparents used to get sick at 85, 90, in which cases like you've lived your life. Now we're getting heart attacks, hypertension, diabetes of 40s and 50s, and that's relatively young.
Well, feel free to preach. That's why you're on here. I want you to preach. Eat good foods. But no, that's interesting you bring that up, because so like historically, like our lifespan wasn't as long. Do you feel like we've reached a peak and we're kind of going back because all the processed food, all the extra bullshit is kind of like causing us to live less? Like, do you feel like we've reached like our maximum lifespan length?
I think we could actually extend it further if we played our cards correctly. And by our cards, I mean our nutritional resources, our scientific resources, and our environmental resources, right? But the thing is that there are a lot of studies which I think are very well-designed studies that I subscribe to that are showing that unfortunately a lot of our lifespans will be shorter than our grandparents. The sad thing is not that it may be shorter because maybe we can extend it. It's that it's not going to be the same quality, unfortunately, the way we're going. We have the medical technology to keep us alive. We have the medicine. We have the machines. But, our grandparents maybe at 60 were still hiking to the store and, going out dancing, whatever they were doing at their age. And we may be at home on oxygen machines, some of us. We may have, more difficulties. And I think the issue is that we have a lot of tools and we don't necessarily know how to use them. Supplementation, foods, and we definitely overindulge, right? We definitely overindulge in this culture. On average, we're eating about 3,000 milligrams of sodium more a year. We're eating about something like 4 pounds more a year worth of carbohydrates now than we ever did in the past. That's not because we're working out more. It's just because we have more access to it.
We just love indulging, overindulging.
Yeah. And it is shortening our lifespan, which is weird because technology is way better than it was 50 years ago.
Well, that's why I feel like it doesn't make sense because with all this advancement and things, you'd think we'd be smarter.
Yeah.
But really, I feel like we're kind of getting more dumbed down.
I think we're smarter in some ways, but there's such it's a rush to consolidate the evidence and the information, right? Like the average person goes online and Googles what is good nutrition, and what do you get? You get a bunch of fad diets, you get a bunch of detoxes and things like that. It's like it's very confusing, and I can't blame people for getting confused and even overwhelmed because there is a lot of misleading info out there.
What's some of the biggest ones that are misleading?
Oh, well, I mean, for one thing, these detox cleanses, those are my favorite. You don't need a detox cleanse by any means. You can ask any person in the nutritional field, any physician. Your kidneys do the detoxing for you, right? Evolutionarily, we didn't have the Atkins diet. We didn't have, kale juice, 50,000 years ago. I think detox diets take people's money and maybe make them feel a little lighter, but it's a waste of your money and it's probably very stressful on your liver sometimes. That's one misconception. I think another huge misconception is that you need to eat organic all the time. And I've seen people who, unless it's organic, won't even eat vegetables. It's like some vegetables are better than none. I've seen a lot of people who take some very funky pre-workouts, supplements, and it's like they're exercising. So it's like, oh, this must be healthy. But it's like, not if you're almost making your heart explode to do it because you took like 5,000 milligrams of caffeine or whatever.
That makes sense. I didn't think about it.
There's a lot of fads. There's a lot of fads out there.
What do you think? So do you think nutrition is more important or exercise is more important in living a healthier lifestyle?
I think they are two sides to the same coin. If I had to pick one, nutrition should come primary and your exercise should come secondary. I think even any person who's like an athletic bodybuilder will tell you that. They'll say, you build the most of your muscles in the kitchen, that whole saying, and then the amount of sleep you get, and then your exercise kind of complements it and builds the muscle in the gym. But I think that you have to keep your body physically adept and challenge it, or it'll break down, right? You have to constantly lift and run. But if you don't have proper nutrition, your body will not repair. And there are plenty of people who exercise
who aren't healthy,
who are not healthy, who to ultra levels, right? I mean, most bodybuilders are not that healthy. They have heart replacements and quadruple bypasses at 45, and it's because they could probably lift you knee over their head with one hand, but they're eating just absolute trash.
Wow. Yeah, and their flexibility is down too, and a whole bunch of stuff too. Yeah, that's what I've been trying to avoid. Wow, how'd you get into nutrition? Like, what made you get into this shit?
When I was a lot younger, I started doing personal fitness training, and I got my certification in that. And then I started realizing how nutrition is really, the glue that keeps the bricks together in exercise and building muscle. And then when I started looking into the biology more, it's like I was looking for this one thing that is the root cause and also the main preventer of the majority of diseases, or at least a lot of them. And I realized that nutrition is both understudied, underutilized, and underappreciated. And I started to really, imagine if you could treat yourself. And that's essentially what nutrition is, right? You can treat yourself over the course of years with a proper diet, or you could just not do it for years, and the doctor could give you a pill one day, which will never make up for the 2 decades of proper nutrition you didn't do. So I think nutrition is just very, it's very integral to human health, not just physically, but even mentally. And that's why I appreciate it, and I think that it's one of those things that most people should appreciate if they want to be able to make as much money as they want, lift as much as they want, have as much energy as they want.
Well, yeah, like one thing, like I said earlier, like my main motivating factor was like, all right, I keep getting sick, you know, and especially nowadays, that's super important.
Yeah.
Like this post-COVID life.
Yeah.
Like, do you see like what are your thoughts on this whole COVID situation?
Oh wow, that's a whole. I mean, so as far as
super broad, but
yeah,
you know, like, have you got it?
maybe it's hard. No, I don't know for sure. I definitely had symptoms at one point. I can't say that it was or wasn't. But here's the thing: even if you don't have symptoms, you could have it. At least half of the people who get it don't show any symptomacy. Right?
They're asymptomatic.
They're asymptomatic. So maybe I am vaccinated, I am boosted, and the good thing with that is that if I do get it, it will hit me like a light cold rather than this devastating thing that will affect me and give me chronic fatigue for months after. But as far as nutrition and COVID is concerned, I think that this pandemic has impressed upon us the importance of, you know, daily maintenance in the long term. People who have not been up with their vitamin D levels or their diet or their physical health now are probably feeling this a little bit more and a little bit more concerned about catching COVID. And there's a lot of people who it's not their fault, right? They have heart disease, they did dialysis. But being generally healthy can make the difference between COVID being really a world ender for you versus just being something where you're like, yeah, I can't hang out with my friends this week. It's a huge indicator of that.
Speaking of end of the world,
oh boy,
what do you think is going to be the end all be all for us?
I don't know that.
Have you seen that?
That's outside of nutrition.
Have you seen that movie? This is the end, or Don't Look Up. Don't Look Up.
No, I want to see with DiCaprio.
Yes.
I've been wanting to see that so badly. Yeah.
Super good movie, and it's just basically a take on how stupid our society is.
Yeah.
Well, because look, I feel like I don't know shit, so take that with a grain of salt. But basically, like, I feel like the diseases are just gonna get more serious, and you know the population is just gonna get smaller. You know,
Sure.
and I feel like partially is because of partially because there's too many of us. We have poor habits, and it's like, do you feel like climate change has an effect on our health too, like that, and the way diseases spread?
I would have to be pretty rebellious to say that climate change doesn't have an effect. It does. The scientific consensus, it does. I subscribe to that fact. Climate change affects everything about us, not just how hot it gets or, you know, more forest fires, which in itself puts smoke into our atmosphere, which is bad for respiratory health. But that's the tip of the iceberg. I mean, literally the organisms that produce oxygen are dying out. You know, if we think asthma and COPD and these things are bad now, imagine when, you know, oxygen levels are affected more measurably. It's going to affect crops. There was a really scary study that came out, I don't know if it was Davis or another school, but basically showed that rice, which is like a staple for millions, if not billions of people, including here, is going to end up being less and less nutritious in the future because as the temperature goes up, the enzymes that the crop produces to make a lot of its vitamins and hold on to its minerals and nutrients can't operate the same. The temperature basically breaks down the enzymes, and it means that you're not going to be able to get the same nutritional value out of rice. And that's not just going to be rice. It's going to be a lot of crops. Some crops will grow less. So famine, water shortages. So you know what? Actually, I can answer that question to my opinion now that we're going into this. I don't think it's going to be some catastrophic thing like in the movies. I think it's just going to be something that we saw coming that scientists and the scientific community has been screaming about for decades, if not longer. It's global climate change. That will be our end all if we don't do anything. And the unfortunate thing is, we are doing something, but it's baby steps. You know, there is such thing as doing your best and it's still not being good enough. Under the last administration, I don't like to go into politics, but we had pretty bad environmental standards. We put a lot of pollution. We ignored a lot of air regulation standards. There's a lot of issue with the way we produce food. Right, you know, producing cattle and livestock is putting a ridiculous amount of emissions into the atmosphere.
I was like, isn't that the number one cause of pollution?
Some studies show that, yeah.
The meat industry?
It's a huge contributor, and you may be right that's number one. I can't say that for sure, but if it's not number one, it's definitely number two. Yeah, that I think that's one of the hugest things. And it's not just air pollution, but, you know, it puts a lot of heavy metals into the groundwater, drilling for oil, these things. I mean, it's just like what we said about nutrition. It's like we have access to all these foods and we can't quite get things in order to figure out what to do and what not to do. We have access to all this technology and it's like, do we do wind and solar? Do we do fracking, what do we do? And the globe is starting to feel the effects from here to India to Japan to everywhere. And it's sad because we know.
I was like, they say it's gonna have like a permanent impact within like the next.
It's already.
Yeah, I was like,
it's already.
Years,
it's already
right?
been
Like,
doing that. I mean, water levels have been going up in certain parts of the world, and the thing that's probably the saddest to me is that it's not going to be us that feels it first in the developed countries. It's going to be the developing ones. They're going to be the ones that start having massive famines, water shortages. There was a movie I saw, or I think it was like a show on Netflix, which was this like sci-fi, but it was like based in the near future, 30 or 40 years down the line, and they were rationing water. You had to go and slide your card, and the water would come out. And again, I'm not saying it's going to be that way. I'm not conspiracy theorist at all. But if we're not careful, this could be a commodity right there. There's water right on the table. It could be a day where you go 15, 20 years now to the grocery store, and you got to tell your kids, how we used to tell people like, oh, wow, I remember when gas prices were $1?
Or
Yeah, it might be like, oh, I remember when, a bottle of water was $1. It's like, it's not $1 anymore, and now you have to slide your special card, and you have this many gallons you can buy a week. It's scary to think about, but it's tangible. But I think the weird thing about human beings is, and this is an evolutionary barrier that we just aren't through yet, we have trouble doing things that kind of extend beyond our line of sight, right? Like we can think about, well, if somebody's in front of me with a knife or a gun, we can think about if my bank account's going to run out by the end of the month. But it's really hard for us to think about 10 years down the line because we haven't met our 10-year down the line
we're
self.
right here, right now type
right
of people. We don't really think long term.
Yeah,
like
we
that.
try to, right? We have data that can extrapolate it, and global warming is definitely kicking our butts. It is. It's going to affect food. It's going to affect water. If people just eat less meat, if people drive, carpool, do less things like that, it can make a big difference. But the problem is, it's already, we've seen it in California, right? Record temperature highs.
Huge increases in fires.
Yeah, huge increase in fires. Crops that won't grow the same way they will. People are getting sicker quicker. COVID. You were saying something about, diseases will get worse. I have the microbiology professor who I talked to about this once, and this is a kind of scary thing to think about, but you can think about the ice caps and the glaciers melt, right? There are bacteria and pathogens there that have not been introduced into the water supply in millions of years.
Oh.
We do not have immunity to those things, and it is very possible, or at least slightly possible, that something that's locked up could get released. Or even this, where did COVID come from? Animals, right? It was probably produced in an animal, not synthesized in animals, sorry, it's probably carried in the animal population for a long time and somehow crossed over, whether it was by ingestion or whatever.
They said it from bats. Do you believe that?
It's possible. It could have been bats. It could have been that other shrew-looking animal. Omicron, for example, there's a lot of preliminary data that shows that Omicron may have, in certain areas, bounced around in rat populations, right? So we had COVID, rats got it from us somehow, it bounced around them, mutated rapidly, and then reintroduced into the human population. So we already know that dogs and cats can get it. So there is back and forth communing of this disease, and it can mutate. COVID definitely came from animals. So what happens if the environment breaks down quicker and worse? Well, animals start feeling more stressed. And I'm not talking about just emotional, physical stress, cortisol levels. Stressed animals or sick animals. If you've had a dog that's chronically sick, you'll notice it won't eat. It'll start just getting lethargic. It'll get sicker quicker. Now, if this happens on a global scale, animals start getting disease quicker. We eat those animals, we get disease quicker.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So basically, we're doomed.
No, we're not doomed. There's things we can do. We're definitely not going to have the same way of life we did 30 years ago because we didn't move and mobilize our resources appropriately when we should have. But there's things we can do. Eating less meat. There's using certain types of vehicles, more public transport. There's a lot of things we can do. But really, it has to come from a global scale.
Yeah, I was like, isn't it really like I heard that the U.S. carbon footprint or it's getting smaller. Or like we're putting out less emissions than we typically do, but like what we have to worry about is like these other countries that are just kind of messing up the whole system. Like I'm sure we're messing shit up too, but yeah. I just like in terms of changing things, it's like I think it comes like policies from lawmakers and shit kind of help change this stuff, right?
Mm-hmm. I think the U.S., I'll be honest with you, I'm not a big fan of the U.S.'s environmental standards.
I'm not either.
Yeah.
I just know compared to like other ones I heard, like China, Russia and stuff,
Maybe.
like they're like
But then compared to some countries like Singapore and Japan and even Canada, we're pretty dismal. China and Russia, yeah, they have their own standard of doing things, but I think there's a lot of countries in the EU that have been looking at the US for a while and being like, you guys produce the majority of the emissions, you guys utilize the majority of the gasoline, do something, and we have been doing something better than in the past, but still nowhere near as good as we could, or at this point, quite frankly, should.
Yeah. What's one of like a scary fact you learned where you're just like, damn, like this shit, like, do you ever come across those where you're just like, wow?
Here and
like,
there. I think one thing was the vitamin D supplementation thing, showing how vitamin D deficiency can cause COVID to just wreak havoc on your system so much. It's like, definitely, if you're vitamin D deficient, talk to your doctor and get some vitamin D supplements, because it can literally make a life or death difference to some people, and that's scary to think that. But on a more grandiose, larger scale, I think one thing that I realized is that such a rapid rate of despeciation is happening. Fish in the ocean that we subsist on are not going to be there in 10 years. In fact, scientists have projected the extinction of certain aquatic animals, and that means that it throws off the food chain. Another thing that scares the heck out of me, not to go into this, but is cyanobacteria. These are plankton, phytoplankton. They produce just as much, if not in some estimates more, oxygen than the rainforests and plant trees do. They are little green cells essentially in the water, and we don't just need oxygen from them, but a lot of tiny organisms eat them, and the bigger ones eat those, and we eat those. So if those little cells die, we're all in deep trouble. And they are starting to die because we have dumped so much trash, plastic.
I was like, plastic in the ocean, right? I was
pharmaceuticals.
Like,
we've affected the pH of the ocean, and it's not a compartmentalized effect. It comes back and it affects us. We're shielded from it in the West because we have amazing water treatment facilities. But, just fly outside of the continental U.S. and you can see the effects. Even if you go to Puerto Rico, there was a bioluminescence. Have you heard of the bioluminescence?
Yeah, it glows in the ocean, right?
Yeah,
it happens in San Diego sometimes.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that. Yeah. So I've been to San Diego, I've been to Puerto Rico. I think Puerto Rico is beautiful. I think San Diego is too. And the bioluminescence, that's bacteria. They produce that naturally, but they're dying off. And in the next 5-10 years, they probably won't be there. Light pollution and changes in the salinity and the pH of the water, those are going to be gone. Like, your kids won't see those anymore.
Really?
It'll be a bedtime story for them.
Yeah, like, do you have any take on like what the world is going to be like when I have kids, like 15 years from now? Like, what are they saying it's going to be like the landscape of everything?
The majority of the scientists who are in environmental policy and public health are warning us that if we do not, I can't say what it will or won't be like, but they're saying that if we don't change our behavioral habits quite quickly and definitively, that it will be very different than anything we're seeing right now. Not just the fact that we'll have more wildfires and water will be more polluted, but foods won't be as available. We've seen with COVID how when COVID first hit and all these manufacturing facilities just stopped, right? We couldn't get some goods and people were worried about food rationing and stuff. But imagine that, but like not for 2 months, right? I think a lot of things can change. International travel will be harder because disease will start popping up quicker. And, COVID is scary, but there's nothing to say that there can't be another pandemic in the next decade or so.
Don't they kind of plan on it? Like, COVID's not going to...
very likely.
This pandemic, it was the first of its kind of, but it's not going to be the last. They're just going to get stronger right?
It's a scary thing, and I don't like to think about it too much. I don't like to talk about it too much because I think it demotivates people, but it can get worse from here. And the only reason I say that is to say we're at a very fork in the road, right? We can go left or right, and these two outcomes are drastically different. 5 years from now, we could be more like we are now, where it's like, this is annoying with wildfires, but it's tolerable. Or we could be looking 5 years down the line being like, wow, I wish it was 2022 still, right? It could get a lot worse. And then 10 years down the line, I don't know. It could get quite bad. I mean, when disease starts to develop that rapidly, I don't think we have a concept of what it could be like, because it's an exponential thing. It's not like this linear thing like, it'll get better. It'll just get worse so quickly that we can't really anticipate it. And our environment affects our food, affects our water, affects us. And if we don't do something about it, this is the same song and dance.
Yeah, I was
they've all been saying this, but it's real. It's very real.
It's real.
Yeah, I have a friend who bought land up in he's a physicist, and he bought land up in Seattle. He's buying land up in Seattle because he's like, it's going to get so warm in the next 15 to 20 years if we keep going this way. And he's a mathematics guy. He just does the math, and he's bloody accurate.
Yeah.
And he's like, if San Diego's temperature will be like the Bay Area, so the Bay Area will be like San Diego, and then San Diego will be like Panama and like right on the equator. It'll be almost like unlivable, sweltering heat. And like Canada, Seattle, that'll be like the promised land. It'll be more temperate there, but that's
more
scary.
neutral.
Yeah, it's scary though, because coastal areas like New York and San Diego and LA, some of these cities are they're gonna change.
Man, I keep trying to tell people. That this was the point of this whole podcast, having you come on, just helping, trying to spread awareness. Like, we have all these issues. How can we, like, is like a call to action? Like, what can we do? I mean, we just live healthier. I mean, throw our trash out, like, As far as
individual health, I think the number one thing people can do right now is, and a lot of people may not like hearing this, but get vaccinated. It's so important. The benefits of vaccines grossly outweigh the risk. Some people, maybe you should talk to your doctor if you have a certain heart condition or whatever, but even then, the vaccine is super safe. We give it to children as young as 5 and as elderly as 80 who have heart conditions. That can literally save you a lot of time and money, because you don't want to be in an ICU for 2 months. And I've seen it. And it's always the unvaccinated. It's like 99% unvaccinated people. So that's one thing. Protect yourself against COVID. Another thing is, realistically, for all the misinformation out there for people's health, if you're going to take information on your health or on your nutrition and lifestyle, get it from someone who's qualified. Make sure they have the formal education, the certification, the licensure. Get it from medical people and not from Twitter or a soccer mom blog or something like that. Yeah, there's a little bit of distrust there right now, I think, unfortunately, towards the medical community. But
does that scare you guys?
It's not necessarily new, but I think this level of it is new. It's a little scary, because it's like, but I understand it. I totally understand it, because, sometimes standards change. Sometimes they say, well, this, and then they're like, oh, masks are good. But the medical community is just a lot of people who are very passionate about helping people with their physical and mental health, and they are not infallible. They can be wrong. But the beautiful thing about science is that it can admit when it's wrong, and it can quickly move to correct it. But the best chance we have is to subscribe to evidence-based science, which means talking to the doctors, the degree holders, the nurses, the PAs, all these people who know their stuff. That's the first thing for your individual health. Obviously, you said this, exercise, have a good diet. Talk to a registered dietitian about what a good diet is. Mm-hmm. They'll tell you. And they won't have you go and get all these fad diets. You'll save time, money, and maybe your hair from falling out from stress and from bad food. That's one thing. And then on an individual level, like, honestly, like, reusable bottles, right? Get a reusable bottle. Let's stop drinking from plastic bottles. That's a huge thing. Stop. I
remember you told me that.
Bottles,
I had a plastic bottle that night, and you're like, that's the problem right there, man.
That's a huge problem, not just for us, but for landfills and for the water. It's not good for anybody except for the companies that sell it.
So we get a Hydro Flask?
Hydro Flask or Clean Canteen. I don't endorse a specific brand, but I have a Hydro Flask. And
the metal ones, though, right?
Yeah, metal. Not aluminum. Glass is okay, and food grade steel, because it won't ionize and put crud into your water.
Food grade
steel.
Yeah,
but not plastic. Even if the plastic bottle says BPA free, it's got something else in it, and it probably can still erode. So it's not the best thing. Glass and food grade steel, like Hydro Flask, for example. That's a lot of things. And then exercise. You don't have to exercise every day. 4 or 5 days a week is good. Maybe a couple days off is good to recover. But if you do that, it doesn't mean you're going to live to 100. It doesn't mean you'll never have a health issue. But even if you get a health issue, I'll share do we have a moment I can share Yeah. So I have a friend, and I won't disclose the info, but I have a friend's mother, very close friend, whose mother developed cancer, neoplastic cancer. And it was a type of neoplastic cancer, which, I mean, none of them are good, but it was in breast tissue. It was invading lymph nodes. It's scary. This individual's mother exercised religiously. Good diet. Never smoked, never drank too much a day in her life. I mean, at her age, she looked probably a decade, if not 2 decades younger. She was mentally sharp, but she still got cancer. Now, genetics plays a huge role. Some people have certain gene deletions that will just make them prone to cancer. But because of her healthy lifestyle, because of her healthy outlook on life as well, and that's the thing about being healthy, is like it's an emotional, behavioral thing, and so physical. Your behaviors will affect your actions. Your actions will affect your behaviors. But because she was exercising, eating healthy, all these things, the cancer went into remission. She's now about 5 years out, and she has no cancer. And Hopefully she never will. Had she not been a healthy individual, still would have gotten cancer because of her genetics maybe, but maybe may not have survived it. That gave her an extra level of protection, I think.
Wow. Well, yeah, if you guys are watching this and you guys were on the fence of, hey, I'm going to make a change in my lifestyle one day, now's the day. Today's the day. If you're watching this, this is the sign, because I'm trying to do it. I really appreciate you explaining everything in terms of the nutrition, how important it is. You know, I think people are gonna change when they want to change. Yeah. You know, so yeah. It is what it is.
Yeah. And the changes have to be gradual, and I think people should be patient with themselves throughout that change period. But if you integrate one thing a week, you know, the habits do start to become very familiar very quickly.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's why I looked on some. I was watching this video on like how to incorporate healthier habits or just better habits. You know, not necessarily healthier, and it's just like our like we do something and we expect to receive something in return. You know, like on like a chemical level, I guess. You know, like we open our phone.
We get a dopamine hit. We get
a dopamine hit.
Activation of our limbic system, and our limbic system has been so overstimulated with our phones and our laptops and social media. Oh man, that's
Is it scary? It's like it's like another drug, right?
It is a drug. It is a drug. Right? It's a digital drug. I don't want to use this word scary because I don't want to attach an emotional. It can be scary for sure, but it's concerning because there's been studies that show that the younger generation now, like 10-year-olds, right, people who are going to be, you know, calling us old pretty soon, are going to have slightly different brain development than maybe when I was growing up or even when you were growing up, because they don't do this. They don't look at each other as much. They on average make less eye contact, play out less. So, you know, there's a lot less. There's the changes in their physical development. Even if the prevalence of eyeglasses, for example, if you don't get regular UV exposure, if you're not outside, your eyes won't. The morphology of the eye can change. So that's one thing. Like, for example, you're going to have people with more glasses and prescription needs. That's a small thing. But your brain changes, and the areas of the brain that deal with empathy are starting to change a little. And that's scary because that means that being on our phone so much is making it so that we don't have as much, or at least the same brand of human interaction as we used to. And it's making us have trouble empathizing as much. We're really good at multitasking now. But the problem is, I mean, you can imagine when you're scrolling through Instagram, you're training yourself to have a 3-second attention span, right? Every story is 3 seconds, 3 to 5 seconds. Do that a few hundred times, you will have trouble paying attention to anything for more than a few seconds. And that comes out, I think, in our relationships. I think it comes out in our ability to want instant gratification, right? Like we want to take a supplement like our vitamin D or our vitamins for like a month and wonder why our skin isn't glowing now.
Because we want to see the instant. It's instant for us now.
There is, and we're all susceptible to that, myself included. But it's definitely something that we're surrounded by. Sometimes I think it's good to just take a step back and realize that sometimes the best change is no absolute change at this moment, right? Just do what we can do, and maybe 10 years later, I'll look back. I'm in my 30s now. I look back to all my 20s. I'm like, am I that physically different? No, and that's a good thing, right? I can fit the clothes that I fit. I'm my physical strength is roughly the same. That's a good thing. If I can keep down to my 40s, that's a good thing. Into my 50s, that's a great thing. I think people are always trying to push the envelope, and that's fine. But being content, I think, is very different than always looking for that extra hit. Being content means I'm happy with this progress, but I'm also happy with where I am, and I'm open to progress. I think sometimes we crave progress to a point where it's a little bit, I don't want to say obsessive, but it's
unrealistic.
It's unrealistic, and it can be a little bit of a downer for us. It's like, how much do we want to change? How frequently?
Well, because I feel like we're also constantly comparing now,
It's
like
another social media phenomenon, right?
So it's just like comparison is the thief of joy.
Comparison, yeah. I've seen a lot of
You've
people.
Heard that?
I haven't heard that particular thing, but I think it makes perfect sense. I think I've seen guys compare their physiques to other guys on Instagram. I've seen girls compare their physique. I've seen some really, I think, a little bit, what I would say is, I don't want to use the word twisted. That's not the most professional. I don't think it's the most psycho-emotionally healthy thing. I've seen people compare their relationships to other relationships. It's like, you don't know the dynamics of that.
Oh, yeah, and what I try to remind people is like, you see what people want you to see on social media.
Absolutely.
Like if they don't, not everything's so peachy all the time, you know.
Yeah. No, I mean, you're not
like
going to
with
put
anyone.
Nobody puts out their heart wrenching challenges on there. You polish yourself up and you put yourself out there, and that's another thing that they actually studied in a sociological study with young youth, is that they find that youth are now much more adept at presenting themselves, right? Like when we were younger, you go to your first interview, it's like, I don't know how to interview, I don't know how to put my best foot forward. They are so good at showing their best foot forward now because they've been trained how to do that on social media to show only the good. But then the thing is, again, there's a human element there of being vulnerable, I think, that people are missing out on. And in human relationships, there has to be an element of openness and vulnerability, or you're just constantly putting up a front with each other. And that's not going to form a very good friendship relationship. Bond, yeah. It does not, yeah, absolutely.
Wow. Yeah, that's interesting to think about. I mean, I get the screen time notifications on my phone, and I'm just like, man, this is another thing, another addiction I got to try to deal with, you know? Yeah. Like, it's just like, fuck.
I think phones are great. I think technology is stupendous. I just think that we have to regulate it rather than let it regulate us, and we've heard this a million times. It's just everybody's determined for themselves what that means. It's a very individualized thing. Generally, if you're out to dinner with your spouse or your friend or your boyfriend, and your phone is on the table, at least to me, what that means is, I'm ready to take a phone call or a text if that's more important than whatever's going on here. I do that sometimes. I try to put it in my pocket now. If you are out with your friends and you're texting more than you're talking, or if you're looking back at your phone every 5-10 seconds, you are sending a message, an implicit message, but a message nonetheless. And you might not even know you're sending it. And I'm not saying that, I'm immune to this. I've done this. And I look back at it, I'm like, that wasn't that great to send that message, because these people in front of me do care, but I'm also a little bit really interested in what the other 5,000 people online are doing right now. It's like, why?
Yeah.
Well, they didn't take the time to actually come here and be with me in, physical space.
Yeah, man. I definitely agree, and I find myself in the same circumstances sometimes. I'm just like, why do I even care? Yeah. It's like I'm just living the moment. But it's so hard because we just want that dopamine hit. I have a bad habit of like, I have like a cycle. Like, I'll open Instagram, I'll open YouTube, I'll open the comments, I'll open all in like a series, and then I'll just reset it. Every time. Like, it's like it's scary. I'm scared of my own habits. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like,
it seems like a harmless thing, right? Until it becomes so habitual that it's the first thing we look at. I've caught myself doing this. I think I did this morning. Roll out of bed, first thing, you don't brush your teeth, drink water, do some push-ups, nothing. I check my phone, and it's like, I'm not checking because I have, I'm on call at the hospital or something really important. It's just want to know what everyone's doing. And it's like, what am I doing?
Exactly, man. Exactly. So, I don't know, but we're probably going to wrap this up right now. I really appreciate you coming by, bringing some awareness. That's all my goal was, to have you on. I think you're super smart, really qualified to me at least, to speak and help spread awareness on eating better and getting on your phone less.
I think the getting on the phone is an individual thing, but I think it's good advice in general. But yeah, I mean, COVID, vitamin D levels, these are things to be concerned about and address, not to panic about, but take little baby steps towards improving your diet. Speak to people who are qualified. Go to sources that have your best interest in mind and are not trying to sell you a product, right? Don't walk into GNC and ask the guy, what do I need to be healthy? Everything in the store as far as he's concerned, right? But people do that. And yeah, no, thanks for having me on. This was a nice conversation. It's been a while since I saw you too.
Oh yeah, definitely, man. We got to have you back on. Whenever you come back.
I wonder what Laith is going to think when he said, does he know I'm on?
I didn't tell him.
I haven't talked to him.
I didn't tell him, but hey, like, comment, subscribe, Free Smoke the podcast. You guys know what's going on. It
was his birthday the other day. Happy birthday, Laith.
Oh yeah, happy birthday, Laith. He's our connection to this whole podcast. So yeah. All right, guys.